For decades, Iran and Israel have been locked in a kind of Cold War, a conflict fought in the shadows, with proxies and secret operations. But what happens when those shadows just aren't big enough to hide in anymore? Let's get into how this long-simmering rivalry has reached a terrifying boiling point.
Now that's not a headline from the past. It's a headline from a future that feels chillingly possible. We're talking about a speculative 12-day war, a scenario that shows just how fast this whole thing could spiral out of the shadows and into open, devastating conflict.
And the human cost, even in this imagined war, is just staggering. You've got Israel and the United States on one side, with dozens killed and over 3,000 wounded. And on the other, Iran and its Houthi allies, with losses well over 1,000 killed and nearly 6,000 wounded. Look, this war is fictional, but it's a brutal reminder of the very real lives that are on the line.
But here's the thing that might surprise you. It wasn't always like this, not even close. In fact, these two countries used to be partners. So that's the real question we have to ask. How on earth did a relationship that started with cooperation get to the absolute brink of total war? To really get what's happening today, we've got to rewind the clock. We're going to look at how a once strategic friendship completely fell apart and turned into one of the most dangerous rivalries on the planet. Believe it or not, back in the 1970s, Iran and Israel were basically partners. They were so close they even co-owned an oil pipeline together. But in 1979, everything changed. The Iranian Revolution happened. The new leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, had a totally different worldview. He didn't see a partner in Israel, he saw an illegitimate outpost to the West. He cut all ties, and the new Islamic Republic made anti-American and anti-Israeli ideology a core part of its national identity. And this wasn't just talk. In 2017, this became terrifyingly real when a clock was put up in a public square in Tehran, literally counting down to the year it predicts Israel will be destroyed. Now, that massive ideological clash didn't immediately spark a conventional war. Instead, the conflict went underground. It moved into the shadows, creating this whole new, undeclared kind of warfare. So Iran's main playbook is what they call the Axis of Resistance. What is that? Well, it's a whole network of proxy groups across the Middle East. Iran gives money, weapons, and direction to groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen. This lets them fight a war against Israel and the US without ever having to put their own troops on the front line. It's a strategy designed to bleed their enemies through 1,000 cuts. Israel, of course, isn't just sitting back and taking it. They have their own counter-strategy, known as Makab, or the Campaign Between Wars, and it's a very proactive approach. Think cyber attacks that mysteriously take down nuclear facilities, explosions at missile factories, and the targeted assassinations of key scientists and military commanders. The idea is to constantly mow the grass, to degrade Iran's capabilities and keep its proxies off balance, all while carefully staying just below the threshold of an all-out war.
Okay, but all of this shadow boxing, there's one issue that threatens to drag the entire conflict out into the open. One red line that changes every single calculation: Iran's nuclear program. This right here, this is the Begin Doctrine. And you have to understand, it's the absolute bedrock of Israeli national security. For Israel, the thought of an enemy that has publicly called for your destruction, getting their hands on the ultimate weapon, well, that's not just another threat. It's an existential crisis that they believe must be stopped no matter the cost. And listen, this is not some distant, far-off threat anymore. Not at all. International inspectors recently found uranium enriched to 83.7% purity at an Iranian nuclear site. For perspective, weapons grade is 90%. This means Iran is officially a nuclear threshold state. They have enough material to potentially build several bombs in just a matter of weeks. The red line isn't some blurry line in the sand anymore. It's right at their feet. So you see how we got here, right? When you put it all together, the decades of bad blood and ideology, the brutal proxy wars, the non-stop covert operations, and now this nuclear countdown, you see how both sides have been pushed right to the edge. Think of it like a ladder. The first rung is that deep ideological hatred from 1979. That fuels the next rung, the proxy warfare of the Axis of Resistance. That, in turn, is met by the third rung, Israel's covert Campaign Between Wars. But the highest rung, the one right before the final jump to open war, is that nuclear threshold. Iran, getting closer and closer to a bomb, runs headfirst into Israel's absolute determination to stop them. It's the step that could force everyone out of the shadows for good.
And that brings us right back to where we started. That 12-day war is just a scenario, a work of fiction, for now.
But it leaves us with a heavy and very real final question. What happens when fighting in the shadows just isn't enough anymore?